Adam Mendelsohn, you are a professor at the University of Cape Town, and my image of South Africa is that this is a post-apartheid country with a lot of focus on non-discrimination and anti-racism, but yet you have been making a report or co-editing a report which says the dynamics of racism, anti-Semitism and xenophobia on social media in South Africa. And so I'm very curious, how come that this is such a core topic still in South Africa, and what is the background?
So it's a good question. So in 1994, South Africa became a proper democracy for the first time. Since really from 1948 until 1994, it had been a racial democracy. It had been a country where only white people had been citizens, had enjoyed full rights, and we'd had a very sophisticated, a very terrible system of apartheid, of separating different racial groups and allocating only to white people the full rights of citizenship, and diminishing rights, reduced rights to a variety of other groups. It's a society where because of this long history of racism, which preceded 1948, but is really legalized in 1948, these things unfortunately do not disappear overnight. So systems of behavior, systems of thought remain, even though South Africa becomes a democracy in 1994. Whites in South Africa had always been a minority, and they remain a minority in South Africa today, but they certainly held power until 1948. The 1990s, so the same moment that South Africa is becoming a democratic society, is the same moment that the internet is really beginning to take off in a very substantial, significant way. So the internet and the birth and then growth of social media really coincide with the democratization of South Africa. So we see here, since 1994, South Africa struggling to become a proper democracy, at the same time dealing with all the influences of its own legacy, the legacy of its own past and the complications of its own past, and then all the influences of now interconnection through Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of other things too. So what the report comes from is a realization that even though South Africa is an entirely different country than it was prior to 1994, even though it's in many ways it has a wonderful constitution, has a whole set of institutions designed to protect democracy, that we still have significant problems, and some of these are problems which have grown distinct, worse since 1994, or at least have taken on new forms since 1994. So we found an ugly picture. We found much divisiveness. We found lots of polarization, so people taking extreme positions, and really social media playing upon and exaggerating existing fissures in the society. So cases where people play upon a whole set of racist ideas, xenophobic ideas, particularly ideas which are hostile towards African immigrants in South Africa, and to some extent also playing upon hostile ideas about Jews as well. So there is plenty of evidence, unfortunately, of a variety of other groups being targeted. Certainly there is a broad hostility towards African immigrants, African migrants from all over Africa, and the hostility comes really from the far left and from the far right in South Africa, but they dominate social media discourse, they dominate the conversation, they push the conversation in different directions, and there it takes on a different expression relating to different groups. So there are particular ideas, for example, about Nigerians, or different ideas about Somalians in South Africa. So there's that level of difference, that particular ideas attached to particular African migrant groups. We also see hostility towards, for example, Chinese in South Africa too. And there again, very particular ideas about their background, about their business behavior, really picking up on, building on a whole set of classic prejudices against Chinese, which we do see elsewhere in the world, but they take on a distinct and particular form in South Africa. Likewise, We see hostility towards Indians in South Africa. South Africa has a very, very large Indian population who's lived in South Africa for generations. And again, very particular hostile ideas about Indians, for example. So with Jews, it's often the ideas which draw on themes we see with anti-Semitism internationally. So the Jews as greedy, the Jews as pulling the puppet strings. We likewise see ideas connected with Israel, that Jews are brutal, that Jews are behaving like Nazis, things of that kind. And it's important to know that South Africa has a very small Jewish population. There are only about 50,000 Jews in South Africa, but if you look at social media, you believe that there are many, many more and that they really hold and control power in South Africa. Ideas about black South Africans, again, it depends on where those ideas are coming from. Certainly what we see is on social media that much political discussion is dominated by the far right white, and here it's a set of ideas, some of which, for example, suggest that South Africa has degenerated, has collapsed since 1994, since South Africa became a democracy. Likewise, ideas that black people are inhuman, that they are like animals. So again, some of these things are distinct to South Africa, but many of them are racist ideas that we see elsewhere.
Is this typical, or is there any distinction here between hate speech in social media and elsewhere regarding the kind of language used?
It's a good question. I think that until recently, this was a phenomenon, this was an experience which was particularly bad on social media, that the sort of controls which we saw in broader society about what was acceptable to say in public life, those existed in society, in broader society, and to a less extent on social media. But I think what we've seen in the last number of years is that, and particularly in the last year, is that there's been a crossover between behavior on social media and what is now said in respectable media, in newspapers and also on news websites, that some of the controls have seemingly disappeared. So it's a very frightening phenomenon for us. So
like social media language seemed to have kind of like colored the general public discourse in this.
Absolutely. I think that the precisely so, that I think that both in terms of what is said and how it's said has moved from social media to the real world.
Oh. Then you have a list of policy recommendations in this report, and on the top of your list actually is public education. Can you say, why is public education so important, and what do you see as the main contribution from education in trying to combat this?
So I think two forms of education. One form of education which is necessary is to learn about the diverse nature of South African society. That South Africa is an incredibly internally diverse country, that with all sorts of both minority groups, but religious and other differences within society. And most people don't recognize this, don't know this, that we instead think in South Africa literally in black and white. That's the only difference which is spoken about broadly. And I think that some of the problems that this report points to are problems of ignorance, that we actually need to learn about each other much more, and that's one of the roles that education can play.
Learn about the true diversity.
Absolutely, and also learn about who we are as people, so that people, when they, instead of grouping people together in these prejudiced ways and assuming things about people, to actually know something about their neighbours and others who live in the cities in which they live. So that's one form of education. I think the second form of education, which is essential, again coming from this report, is how to behave online. Etiquette, how to interpret what is posted and how to think before posting. And I think we are at a moment where the internet is still new, and we aren't yet educated in how to think and use it properly before posting or retweeting thoughtlessly.